What do you do when you step into a leadership role at an organization in turmoil? Today, we'll be talking about that with Sultan Shakir, the new president of the Mizoni Center, on Generosity Conversations. Hey there, I am Chris Wink. I am the co-founder and CEO of the company that publishes Generocity.org. In addition to technically, we're a news organization, covers professionals. We're having conversations about building better organizations and resiliency inside of that. So today, I get to have an important conversation with Sultan Shakir, who's the new president of the Mizoni Center. Sultan, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Sultan, you are a month or so into your role at Mizoni Center. In the last 3 years, there were sexual assault allegations of a medical director. There were at least 2 CEO departures. There was complaints, criticisms, challenges of a workplace in turmoil. Later, there was also unionization. There was a year-long search to pull you in your role. That's a challenging environment. So I guess I want to start with, what are your first steps when you come into a role knowing that backstory is there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I would say the way that I approach it, like the first thing to do aggressively is to listen, because I think it's really important to understand the context in which people are currently living in relation to a lot of the past turmoil. So how are people feeling about what happened? What is left unresolved about what happened or didn't happen with all of the different incidents over the past 3 years, and just really understand, what's kind of causing the current angst in the organization and what that angst is about. And then from there, you can chart the path forward. But I think that first part of really understanding who's in the space, how they're feeling in the space, what the pressures are in the space is really the first step.
Do you feel considerable skepticism of you because there was CEO turnover? There was leadership turnover. Do you feel skepticism? Are you coming to this role about how could this organization ever come back from what it's gone through in the last few years?
So the interesting thing is there's not a lot of skepticism towards me and the role. I think there's a lot of appreciation that someone is interested in moving the organization forward. I think really what I'm seeing is the community expressing a deep desire for the Mizoni Center to do more and to do better in certain areas. But also the other thing, and the reason really why I took this job, is when you just stand in the lobby and talk to patients who come in, they talk about how great the care is. They talk about why one person literally travels from Connecticut past New York City down to Philadelphia to access care at Mazzoni Center. And that's because the care is incredibly culturally competent. The care is incredibly comprehensive. And so I think the real work that's on my plate working with community is to really reconcile those two things. The strong care that's provided with the unmet expectations of community. And I think a lot of those unmet expectations really are about cleaning up some of the things you mentioned, like the past allegations of sexual assault that I don't think have been publicly addressed in the way that they need to be addressed, and the stability and leadership. And just to talk a little bit more about the past sexual assault, the one thing I want the community to know, whether like you're on staff at Mizoni Center or whether you're a client at Mizoni Center or a supporter of Mizoni Center, the organization has really done a lot to ensure that the actions that happened in the past never happen again. And that's part of the work that I'm working really to get out into community and make sure that the community and the staff feel safe and confident that when you come to Mizoni Center, you will be treated with dignity, you will be treated with respect, and you'll be safe.
Let's talk a bit about that. Mizoni Center, one of the country's largest LGBT-focused health and wellness nonprofits, 14 million or so in annual revenue. It's a meaningful, hefty, large organization. It's an institution inside one of the country's most vibrant LGBT communities. But it was a daunting moment. I know we at Generosity had repeatedly covered challenges at Mizoni. So talk to me a bit about your personal connection to this work that I imagine any leader who steps into an environment like this has to really care about the work, I would hope. Right. So tell me a bit about your personal connection to this work, why this was a role that you were willing to take on.
Yeah, so good question. So one, I'm from Philadelphia. I was born and raised in Philadelphia.
Where in Philly were you born or raised?
So I was raised in North Philadelphia.
Okay.
Kind of split time between my dad's house and my mom's house once they separated, but like really grew up in North Philly, like right by Broad and Erie. So I would just hop on the subway and go down to the neighborhood, and that's really where I started to see some of the first examples of like out proud Black gay men. and was able to start to, dismantle some of the things that I was told as a young Black man about how I was supposed to be, how I wasn't supposed to be. And so the Mazzoni Center and other institutions that take care of the LGBT community, particularly the Black and brown LGBT community, are institutions that mean a lot to me. And I think there is so much potential for Mizoni Center to expand the great work that it's done over the past 30-something years into more communities that are looking for more support because they've traditionally been underserved. And so that's really why I do the work. Like, there's such a strong need for places to support the LGBT community. And Mizoni Center has a legacy of doing that, has the potential to do that more. And again, there have been some pretty serious missteps over the past few years that have led to challenges around trust in the community. But again, the work that the organization does is fantastic and unparalleled.
Do you have any memories of growing up near Broad and Erie, like formative in your own experience in joining Philadelphia's LGBT community, identifying there, and anything that you think you hold now in trying to recreate perhaps for the next generation of Sultans? Like, there's anything that you remember experiencing then that you want to make sure Mizoni does today?
So there are definitely things that I remember, but I'm also very clear that my job is not to necessarily recreate my memories, because those memories are decades ago. My job is to ask community what they need today, what they're going to need tomorrow and in the future, and make sure the organization is set up to meet that. I came to Mazzoni Center from running an LGBTQ organization that works with young people ages 6 to 24. And that's how I became very clear that, like, the work of organizations today, while it needs to be informed by the work of the past, usually involves new programs and new initiatives, because the needs change. Obviously, after COVID, the needs have changed again. And so I think organizations have to consistently learn from the past while reinventing themselves to meet current and future needs of the community.
Can you speak a bit more about what you feel has been put in place? You mentioned earlier that you felt the Mazzoni Center won't go back to the turmoil it's had in the past. What makes you so confident in that?
Sure. So there are a number of things, and we're working to get them fully documented. So there'll be a much more comprehensive report coming out from the organization about what has happened over the past few years to ensure it won't happen again. But to talk a little bit about some of the things, one, internally, there are structures that are now in place that weren't in place before, where if any person on staff has a complaint about sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, sexual violence, there is a clear structure in place for that complaint to be reported up through leadership all the way up to me. If the complaint is about me, it then goes to the board. And so there are definitely structures that the organization has put in place to help ensure that cases can be reported in a way that has them handled appropriately. Because I think when looking back at what happened in years past, that was really the big failure. Something was reported, there wasn't a lot of confidence in the individuals who reported that the organization was going to do anything about it, which decreases the number of other people who want to report. And so things didn't really happen that should have happened to make people who were victimized or survivors of the incidents feel safe and supported in a way that really allowed the issue to be resolved. And again, that was because I don't think there was faith that the organization was going to take the appropriate action. And so those policies for staff to report, other mechanisms for community members who are clients or even not clients to report incidents that are happening to get all the way up to me or even to the board are now in place. And then also just a president that's, from what I'm being told, far more accessible. Like, I will freely give out my email address, my phone number. If you call the number or text the number, it goes straight to me. It doesn't get screened through somebody else. My work in this role is largely to be as accessible to community as community is interested in or sees a need in terms of engaging with the president of Mazzoni Center.
After several years of the turmoil, the Mazzoni Center has then been, like all of us, going through a couple of years of a pandemic, which has made all work more challenging. I wonder if you could give your first early assessment of the state of the Mazzoni Center community, the constituents you serve. How damaging or challenging has the pandemic been? How strong do you feel you are now? Talk a bit about that, the pandemic.
Yeah, and so I think there are a number of ways to talk about it, and I always try to balance, like, being very clear about the pain that situations like the pandemic cause, while also talking about the resilience of the community. I think those things need to be balanced, largely so the community doesn't constantly feel the need to take on more. And I say that because I think there's so many harmful messages that just come to the community of things like, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Like, my take is there are a lot of things that may not kill you, but that also weaken you. And And so I think that's why I try to balance the perseverance of the community and the resiliency of the community with like the reality of what we're going through. And so to talk about the reality, COVID was, really devastating for a lot of members of our community. As a community that creates chosen family, that creates spaces for us to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to be ourselves, social distancing and the inability for us to meet in person, one was just really challenging socially, mentally, behaviorally, not being able to be around the people who love and support us and that we love and support. Then also you add things like telehealth and needing technology just to engage with other people, particularly medical providers. And that's another barrier for individuals who may not have access to that technology or the resources for things like consistent internet access. And then you add other factors like education or food access and the number of young people who were challenged by online school and the disconnections that they had to teachers and other siblings. So just being so disconnected from so many traditional supports was really hard. In addition to the medical effects that COVID had that are consistently disproportionate against the LGBTQ or Black and Brown communities. And so these discrepancies were already happening with a number of pandemics like HIV and AIDS. And then you add COVID on top of that, and it's just increasing layers of stress and trauma in the community. And so I think an additional thing to talk about is how the staff fared through that, because the other thing that I'm really clear about is we really try to recruit from the community at the Mizoni Center. And so what ends up happening is you have a traumatized community trying to support a traumatized community, and that takes even more support for the staff. And so
Right.
the things that I've really looked at is how do we create a space where staff can come in, take on all of the different challenges that the community's face, or not all of them, but take on some of the challenges that the community's facing, but still leave at the end of the day feeling complete, feeling whole, and having a way for themselves to just go home and have some joy and some peace in their lives.
The staff part is well timed. We are talking about still dubbed the Great Resignation. We had high quit rates across industries. You've alluded to it, that people who were in and around health and wellness services were even more likely to feel that burnout. I guess you could add that to the plate of challenges that you confront as a leader. Of all the many challenges you confront, I wonder, what are you most likely to lose sleep for? What keeps you up at night, or what is most likely to keep you up at night?
So I think the thing that keeps me up at night is really the inability to meet community need. And I think that's the hardest thing about running a nonprofit or even working in a nonprofit is you have to end every day knowing that you did not meet all the need of the community. And so there's constantly a feeling of you're not doing enough and the organization is not doing enough because the need is so high. And so it's really critical for anybody, whether it's somebody in my position or someone working in any position at particularly a direct service organization, to find ways to take care of yourself, to find ways to set boundaries, to be clear with yourself personally and emotionally about the amount that you and the organization are able to do for community. And also, more importantly, to partner with other organizations. So one person or one organization isn't trying to take on the entire need of a community. And so, yeah, that's really the hardest part, just the consistent sense of more needs to happen in order for the community to be healthy.
You alluded to earlier, you most recently were in a leadership role at an organization in Washington, D.C. I'm always curious about what lessons peer cities can teach each other. I'm curious, in your having both grown up in Philadelphia, then done considerable work in a different city in Washington, D.C., and then come back to Philadelphia. I wonder if there are lessons that D.C. and Philadelphia ought exchange, whether it be making their communities more resilient, whether it be supporting residents in their own economic and social opportunities. What lessons do you think DC and Philadelphia could teach each other that you bring in your role now?
Sure. So I'd say the one thing that I've been excited to see in Philadelphia that you don't really see a lot in DC is the level of grassroots activism that happens here in Philadelphia, particularly on the local level. One of the challenges about living in DC is so many people come for a specific reason, and a lot of those reasons are federal or international. And so a lot of the focus, even in terms of like the day-to-day conversations of people who live there, is like what's happening on the national, international scale. And so having worked there in a local LGBTQ organization, I saw how challenging it was to get what is one of the largest LGBTQ communities in the country to mobilize around local LGBTQ issues. Now, it happened, the community is doing it. There have been a lot of really great wins, but again, the focus is largely federal and international in DC. So in Philly, you can just see and feel the local activism in a way you don't see in DC. And so I think that's great. But then on the flip side, the great thing about DC is since people largely do come for work, folks are very, very well connected and networked. And so there's a lot of strategy about how to work together on the local, national, and international level to meet needs. And so that happens in Philly. But again, DC is such a unique place in terms of why people come there, what they're working for, that it just plays out differently.
Say more about that. I wonder, we are across the country, cities are trying to confront what the pandemic taught them about their futures. There are questions around how the dynamism of both our neighborhoods and Center City core can thrive. This is something that, again, cities across the country are thinking about. The Mizoni Center is heavily based in place. You guys are an anchor and have been an institution physically for decades. That what you're saying there about our relationship to place, has that shifted at all in a pandemic, or do you have any concerns about Philadelphia's future coming out of this pandemic?
I mean, I have concerns about a lot of queer and trans Black and brown people's future, like not just in Philadelphia coming out of the pandemic. I mean, we lost people at a disproportionate rate, like lost jobs at a disproportionate rate. Like the effects of the pandemic, I think we're largely going to see for years, if not decades later, like increases in HIV transmission when we were, working on decreases in a lot of communities. We've seen disproportionate rates, again, in Black and brown communities when you look in the LGBT community. And so there are a whole lot of effects that we're going to be working on cleaning up because of COVID, again, not just in Philly, but around the country and even around the world.
I can't ignore how this must feel like a homecoming. Having grown up in Philadelphia, gone elsewhere, including DC in leadership roles, and then coming back in this role. Maybe talk a little bit about what it has meant for you to come back to a leadership role in a city that you grew up in.
Yeah, so I mean, it's great, but a little odd at the same time. Like when I was living in Philadelphia, I was a kid, then a teenager. And so like your context in community is a little different, particularly as a closeted teenager. Like I would never think as a closeted teenager, I'd be on this interview talking about running an LGBTQ health and wellness organization in Philadelphia. Because I, frankly, at that time, didn't even see a path towards me being an out Muslim adult and being a Muslim adult and being a queer adult. Like I remember conversations in my head about those two things just cannot exist in the same place. I remember thinking, what's going to happen if I get a partner and family wants to come visit? Like, I'm going to have to ask that partner to get a hotel room or leave in the bird cage or something like that. Like that's what I was dealing with as a young queer person at the time. So now coming back, in context of this being my home, of having family that is still here, who loves and supports me as an out queer person, it's amazing, but just noticing the kind of difference in experience that you kind of have as a young person figuring it out, and then I'm a person of my age now with the power and privilege of being the president of an organization working to meet the health and wellness needs of the community.
Let's turn now to what happens next. So you've come into this role, you're still quite new in it. I am sure there's still considerable trauma and hurt and damage in communities, but there's also incredibly important work to be done. That's surely something that you have to balance both of those. So talk a bit to me about what's next. What do you hope to accomplish in the next year, in the ensuing years? What comes next?
Sure. So the immediate next step is one, putting out more clear communication about the organization's acknowledgement about its past, particularly around sexual assault, but also to be clear around other issues. The reason the listening sessions are so important is I'm very clear that everything that I've heard about the Mazzoni Center has been either through the lens of the media, which is great, but it's still a lens, or through the lens of specific conversations with individuals. And so I think it's important to have a pretty comprehensive and open conversation with community members who may have never said anything about their experiences with Mizoni Center, whether negative or positive. So again, it's that strong, deep listening in community over the course of the next month, and then reporting out to community about what we heard, and more importantly, what we're going to do about it, and working with community moving forward to assist us in our strategic plan to really map the next 3 to 5 years of the Mazzoni Center's history. And so that work is going to start over the spring and summer, and we are going to have an intentional process where we, look at what services exist in the city. What is Mazzoni Center doing well? What could we do better? What resources are out there for us to do better? And have some frank conversations, again, about the strategy and the path for the Mazzoni Center for the next 3 to 5 years.
What do you think success looks like a year from now, when we inevitably have a follow-up conversation? What do you hope to accomplish by then?
So one, I hope that there's more community trust in the organization, particularly from people who have been burned by Mazzoni Center for a number of different reasons. I hope there's more acknowledgement about some of the great things that are happening at Mazzoni Center, because I think one of the unfortunate things about the fact that this drama and trauma from the organization's past is still unresolved is that a lot of the great opportunities for community care aren't really getting out there. Like, we have more ability to support people who are living with HIV or who are unaware of their status. We have more ability for people to come in and just get tested in terms of checking on their sexual health or whether or not they have an STI or an STD over at the Washington West Clinic. And so there are more opportunities for community to engage in Mazzoni Center. And I think it's, again, really important for us to clean up that history in order for us to really start building the pathway forward with community.
We're running short on time. I should have noted, though, for those watching live on LinkedIn, if you drop comments, you can share those questions. And I thought this was a good one, Sultan. Just how difficult a decision was it for you to take this role? I'm sure at some point you were confident, but I would challenge you that there must have been times where you had hesitation. So for other leaders who might be considering stepping into roles in challenging circumstances, can you talk a little bit about your thought process? What was your methodology for deciding this was the right opportunity for you at the right time?
Yeah, so to be clear, I was hesitant like all the way through walking into the office I'm heading into right now. And the reason largely is so much was unknown. Again, like just having read everything through the paper, having a few conversations, because the interviews are confidential. It was just so much that I did not know what I would be walking into. Because the other thing for leaders who are contemplating these positions, the other thing to know is any ED will tell you this, like the interview process is largely speed dating in order to get married. Like everyone's on their best face and putting the best foot forward and like, oh, of course it's going to be wonderful working here. Right. And then you get in and you're like, you just find out the realities of any working situation. So there are always things that you walk in knowing you don't know. And so yes, there was a lot of hesitation, but I'm happy to report that like once I got here, a lot of the positive things that I'd heard about were confirmed. The staff, again, who are providing care are fantastic. They are incredibly thoughtful about how they do the work and how they provide the care in a culturally competent way. The reports about community harm and community distrust were also very real and very valid. Like it's rare to have a conversation with somebody, whether on staff or a client or in community, where the past unresolved history of this organization doesn't come up. And I think the great thing that I would say to people considering a job like this is that if you have the personality like mine and loves engaging with people and loves thinking big and creating vision, it's actually a great job. The listening sessions are going to include sessions about the history of Black and Brown leaders in Mazzoni Center over the decades, and conversations about Black trans women who helped start the Philly Trans Wellness Conference. And so there'll be really great learning opportunities and opportunities to learn about the rich history of the organization and vibrant history of the organization. Again, in addition to some of the traumatic and trying times that the organization should have done much better and has to and will commit to never repeating.
How'd you choose where to live when moving back to Philadelphia? Someone who grew up here, but in a very different place. What went into your mind about where you wanted to be?
So I actually haven't settled on where I'm going to live yet. Largely because I wanted to check out the neighborhoods. Like in every city, every big city, the neighborhoods change over the years. And so figuring out like where I want to settle down, again, as an adult, living in the city is a question. Like, do I want to be in the neighborhood by the office, or do I want to like, be able to go home at the end of the day and just be somewhere else? Like, I haven't really answered those questions. I really want to spend a lot of time being accessible to community and to staff. And so I really, haven't gone out and answered that. Also, I wanted it to be a little bit warmer so I could walk around the neighborhoods and get a feel of it. So yeah, taking my time on that.
Understood. Sultan, before I let you go, anything that you would want to say to other nonprofit professionals, stakeholders of the Mizoni Center, other leaders in any capacity who look at a challenging environment and want to know how to step in the right way? Anything that you want to make sure that you get said?
Yeah, I would say the one piece is someone on staff like framed it really well for me when I was thinking about like the organizational accountability work. And I talked about how like I needed to take accountability for some certain things. And what he said was, he was like, well, organizational accountability. It was really quick and it was at the end of the conversation. So it took a couple days to land. And so like what I would say to other leaders considering jobs like this or who have jobs like this is to really ground yourself in the fact that it is organizational accountability that needs to be brought. And that's why I don't really lose a lot of sleep over it. Like, I don't take the critiques personally that people have of the organization. I don't take the organization's history personally. I am clear and also clear with the staff that's working on these listening tours. Like, we did not commit this harm, but it is our job to make sure that the organization takes accountability for that. And that actually feels good. Like, it doesn't feel like, darts and arrows and trauma like at me and the other staff working on it. It actually feels good that we're able to create these healing moments and bring community together. And so I think having that frame of, again, it being organizational accountability and you as the new leader not taking it all personally, I think really helps create an environment of openness and welcomeness to hearing that feedback.
I can note in the chat, I see Bobby Pearson, Sharon Gallagher, a few folks have offered you their well wishes. So I'm sure there are community members and stakeholders who recognize the difficult situation you came in, but I'm sure they and others will certainly want to hold you accountable to respond to the difficult challenge it's been. Sultan, thank you so much for having this conversation. I think it means a lot that you're willing to. We'll be sure to follow up with you. As always, we both technically and Generosity enjoy having conversations about building better organizations. Sultan, thanks for being here, and look forward to more conversations. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.
Thank you. Bye.